The more I've learned about Sheila, the more I've come to realize that many of the values I hold regarding what it means to be an open and engaged designer are ideas that Sheila had in fact pioneered decades ago. In 1973, she was quoted as saying, "The process by which forms are made and the forms themselves embody values or standards or behavior that affect large numbers of people. For me, it is this integral relationship between individual creativity and social responsibility that draws me to the design arts." And through her public art, her design, and especially her teaching, Sheila has succeeded in giving life to this thought. She has been at once a critic and a shaper of the field of graphic design. She has created platforms through which the voiceless can be given a voice. She has practiced communal pedagogy that values experimentation, conversation, and equality. And you can stop me if any of this doesn't sound right. She has questioned the notion of a universally appropriate form, communities constructing their own meaning, and on and on and on. She also, I think she values working with designers and helping them achieve what I would say is their own authentic form that is authentic to them. And the fact that doing that and speaking as individuals, as designers, brings value to their communities. Her accomplishments, I will try to breeze through this, include starting the design program for women at CalArts, the first one. She co-created the Feminist Studio Workshop. She ran the Women's Building and the Women's Graphic Center. She was the first woman to receive tenure at the Yale University School of Art. Since 1990, she has been director of the Yale University Graphic Design MFA program, which is one of the most adventurous and forward-thinking programs in the world. She is also a public artist, creating poignant works that celebrate the neighborhoods they exist within in places as far-flung as Hong Kong, New York, Boston, Los Angeles, and Yekaterinburg. That's in Russia, by the way. She didn't actually ask that I include that. In addition to her own degrees, she has received 5 honorary doctorates. She is the recipient of the Design Legend Gold Medal from the AIGA in 2004 and the Grand Master Award from the New York Art Directors Club in 2009. And in short, she has been a trailblazer. And I am so happy to welcome Sheila Levrant de Bretteville.
So you've been looking at this PCB over here. It was found in a garbage pail with a whole bunch of other ones that I found in 1969. And the piece of music that you heard before is by Horace Tapscott. He is the founder of a quintet in Los Angeles at the same time as I was finding these things in the garbage pail. And he was working for his own community, and I'll talk a little bit more about him later. But it's really important to me that talking about the kind of freedom I felt when I moved to Los Angeles is creative freedom. And there's a kind of freedom that isn't accorded to everyone, and we have to really pay attention to who was being left out and overlooked. And so this is, the PCB is here because if you look closely, the connections here, there are connectors and there are resistors. And in many ways, that's a metaphor for the kind of work that I've been trying to do. I've been more often a connector than a resistor, but when push comes to shove, I'll resist. And it's really important to do that and not to just buy into whatever's going on. So with that, I'm going to give you an idea about positionality. And since I don't like to read while you read, you read. So what I'd like you to think about is the way in which there are multiple meanings to all objects and experiences. And in that way, I'm going to try to talk about the backstory of different things I've made, and also how I've changed how I think about it over time and how other people see it because of their positionality. So that idea that things have multiple meanings and that when you make it with one meaning doesn't mean that's the only meaning or even the meaning that other people are reading into it. And that's an important thing to pay attention to from our perspective. So this is Horace Tapscott. This is a really fine book. It's based on an oral history with him. He and his quintet, the Pan-American, African-American Orchestra, played music for the neighborhood, and every bit of money he made went into that neighborhood. I mean, he did everything that the Panthers did, only quietly in South Central. And he talks about it in this book, and I love the title, Singing the Songs of the Unsung. And that's, of course, what was going on. During his time that he was playing, the police stopped his concerts every now and then just simply because they said it was fostering riots, which is complete BS. So this was sunny California. I mean, it's probably a good day to say it. It was cold this morning. And I benefited from coming there because I grew up in New York. I hadn't seen trees like this. They don't seem to shade anything. I don't understand trees like this. But I benefited from the fact that I went to work as the person who was doing all the work for a school that was being planned. And because they were so busy planning the school and hiring people, they said, here, take all the work that has to be done to show what the school's about and do it, and don't bother us, which was great, just simply great. So among the things I did was this poster, which is about this big, 9 by 6. It's shrink wrapped, and that's where the printed circuits were chopped up into little pieces, and actually it was made in a place where people were who were in wheelchairs could go and put the objects onto each of the sheets, and before it was cut up, and then they heat the plastic, and it comes down over all the objects and glues it permanently to the board. So there were about 15,000 of these that got sent out. They really sent them everywhere, all in the world, because CalArts didn't know if anybody would come. And so for a while, I never showed people this particular piece because because of the pronoun. I felt embarrassed that I didn't catch it and didn't see to just change the language so it didn't have to use he. It was have something more inclusive like we. But then, of course, things changed. And over time, many, many books were published, and more people thought about gender, and gender became this fluid thing that isn't just male and female. It's actually F and M, but also F more than M, and LGBTQ, intersex, and God knows what else. So it's a much broader thing, and then using a pronoun, it becomes an even more important thing to pay attention to. And then I thought I ought to tell you that that many of the things that I do as a designer myself is what I teach, and it's very much influenced by Paulo Freire, who is a Brazilian writer who wrote, and I just really resonated with the sense of equality between a teacher and a student rather than a hierarchical relationship. And it's guided not only my own work, but also my teaching. So I thought I might tell you a little bit about this book. For those of you who were here at Hippie Modernism, this is what Lorraine Wild, who I totally respect, called hippie modernist work. I myself would never call it that, but that's okay. So, but because CalArts was being planned and I really didn't know what it would be, I went to the Associated Press and found photographs from all the years, a decade, in which it was being planned, and picked those pictures and put the thing together so that anyone who opened it would have to make their own meaning from looking at the pictures of what this school could possibly be. And among the things that held the book together were gestures. There were all different kinds of gestures that are done with one's hands that you see repeated. And also there are formats of photography that repeat, and that's what gives it a kind of a coherent thread all the way through it. And then there are these letters that were written by the person who was the provost and his friend about what was going on in the world over that decade. So you'd be going through this book and making sense. I also included applicants. This is an applicant who sent a poem in to get into CalArts, and of course the Vietnam War was going on during that time, and the peace symbol. And then they were the different teachers. This was a group from the East Coast who had a very political, and they taught critical practice, the critical studies part of CalArts. And then, of course, I was on this particular event, which was protesting the war in Vietnam in Washington, D.C. But he's discussing what's going on in these. This is not courier. This is typewriter type. And then, of course, across the country, I'm not sure because I don't know Minneapolis well, all cities began to proliferate this Xerox versions of suburbs. I had never, one of the reasons I didn't like Betty Friedan, she was talking about the suburbs. I'd never seen the suburbs. I grew up in the city. What suburbs? Who's bored? All the women in my family worked. So it's very hard to sometimes get behind something that you haven't got a lived-in experience to reflect to. And of course, there's Stokely Carmichael and Che Guevara. And then in the very center of the book is where I put all the people without hierarchy. So I alphabetized everyone who was involved in planning the school and the pages where you could find them, but you wouldn't find it until you went to the center of the book and found it. And then it goes on. This is a similar kind of construction of Stokely Carmichael and I think it's Fidel, not Che. And of course, this is Reagan and Reagan. You know. And then just to give you a sense of how the book is organized, that it had different kinds of papers, and here was a conversation between two people, so I interspliced the type, which became a trope after a while, but this is the first time I think anybody did it, or anyone I know did it. Whoops, let me go back a second. So then there was, in '71, there was an international conference in Aspen, and they wanted me to do a publication about it. And at that point, I had an infant who was about 6 months old, and I really didn't see how I was going to go there, give a lecture, and take care of Jason and stuff like that. So I came up with this idea of taking the newspaper and dividing it into pieces and giving out the pieces to all the people who are like you, people who are an audience, and giving their voice, which I hope you're going to ask questions, because that would be a similar thing to this. People asked questions and made statements on those pieces of paper you can see it, the piece in there, you know. So, and this is what, this is what these pages look like. So I don't know if you've ever read it. There's a really article about David Hammons. If you don't know that artist, you definitely should get this book on David Hammons' work. In it, there's a binary that has dirty and clean, a list of things that are dirty and clean. And I spent an entire train ride trying to think of my work as being on the dirty side, but it wasn't true. I'm really on the clean side, but this is one of the dirty ones. This could actually be, because when you can see the context of the making in the thing that's made, it often isn't as clean and perfect and finished and smoothed off, where you see nothing, no edges. And so this is the way these pages came out. Actually, I'm in that picture. So, and there's my friend Angela Pickett. It's in that picture. Well, I can't point to it. There's the balloon, and then above it, and then the one above that. That's me on the far right, my husband Peter, and Angela Pickett, and Hans Propy. So we were audience as well as speakers. And then I did another newspaper. I was asked to do a newspaper about a program in Fresno that Judy Chicago ran, and I went up to do it, and that's me holding it. And if you look at the cover, which was a lipstick, it's kind of a symbol of femaleness, wearing lipstick. So, I probably kissed a napkin and made a picture of it. But what was more important to me was the equality of the teachers and the students in that class. All got 2-page spreads. I figured out the one who talked the most and made the copy fit there, and then it meant to fit all the others. And then each one got a picture of themselves and a picture of something they'd done. And of course, this is the one that everybody chooses. Why? I'm not even going to answer that one. But very often you take the name that the people use as a pejorative for you. Like now, nasty women is because Trump called women nasty. So you say, I'm a nasty woman, and in order to own it. And that's done by many groups to take the pejorative and change its meaning by owning it and giving it a different kind of meaning. So this was a cheer for T. Grace Atkinson when she came to Fresno, and so there you've got it, C-U-N-T. And then I began to teach. This is the Women's Design Program. I'm in that picture on the far left. And what I tried to do with this program was to change, I don't know if those of you who have ever looked at Typographic magazine, and Dan Friedman gave an assignment where you did a progression of squares with the weather, changing the typography, et cetera. And so I asked the students to pick something of the same amount of words, but pick a quote that they had some connection to. And so it makes it more, it's easier to work on something that you have a connection to. So one of the women chose Last Exit to Brooklyn, and she chose The Rape of Tralala, and she organized all the type where she got all the verbs together, all the pronouns together. So it gave a different way of designing than just simply moving the words around, as if, because who cares about the weather? Especially in LA, you don't care about the weather. Oh, I forgot to tell you what those stickers were. So those stickers on the bottom right, they came out with Fem sprays, which I thought was the most ridiculous product on the face of the earth. So I made these stickers and gave them out, and I put them on the products in the drugstore. But then one of my students decided she was going to do it, and she was apprehended. I had to get her out of trouble because you're not allowed to do that. So yeah. Now I explained it. So among the other things, I found the way that little girls are, who are being taught what menstruation are about, had these really foolish-looking, sort of cartoonish things that like Disney had made at the time. And so I was looking, what is an alternative to that kind of privacy around it? And I organized a group of women and boys and girls and women and men in their 20s, and then older people, to talk about menstruation at different times of life. And so one of those videotapes is there, and here are the girls talking about it. They got a little confused and started talking about birds and how many holes they had, and then I had to try to get them back on subject. And so then with Judy and Arlene, we decided to leave CalArts and create a place where women could come and do their own work. So we created the Feminist Studio Workshop, and we sent out these brochures. This one is sort of based on a quilt, but you can see it's also a progression. This is the brochure that we folded up and sent out. And then we rented the building that CalArts used to be planned in, as CalArts moved to, I forgot the name of the town. Anyway, moved out of LA, whereas this building, which had been the old an old school, the Chenard School, which has a wonderful history of its own because it was started by a woman for all the men who came back as vets, so they could who wanted to become artists, went to that art school. And her name was Chenard. And so this is a fantasy of us running, women would run to the women's building, trying to get women to come to the women's building. It's named after the building of 1893 in Chicago, the Columbian Exposition. There's my son Jason at my feet. But you can see how all the women are white, and that's why many women at that time really felt it was wrong that white women should speak for women of color as well, and it is wrong. And so I'm friends with Hazel Carby, who's written a very fine book. It's about literature from a feminist perspective, reconstructing womanhood. She's African American. Actually, she's African British, because she's actually from Britain. And this is the original building, and this is the first page from the women's building at the Columbian Exhibition. And then within the building, I had seen an article. I was living in Milan working for Olivetti, and I'd seen an article about Eileen Gray. Who knew that there was an Eileen Gray who had done a lot of different buildings, very beautiful, and furniture that was really amazing. This was a rug of hers. We painted on the floor of the gallery. And so I remember standing there and having somebody be behind me saying, these feminists, they always pick these third-rate artists to show. I know she was, within a year, they were selling her Bibenden chair at the Museum of Modern Art for like, I don't know, $600 or something like that. So it's like there was a kind of non-acceptance that if you were a feminist or you cared about a particular woman, that you wouldn't be as good as somebody else out there. And that still can go on. And so then the AIGA at that time picked 100 designers and asked each of us to do something on a color. And so I chose pink and sent, this piece was 30 by 30 with 4-inch squares that were, I put map tacks to hold them on. And they lost it after they had it shown at the Whitney. They moved and they lost it. But they did send me the little film negatives. So at the Women's Building, we printed posters. And I ran around with my son, pasting them up all over in Los Angeles. And I got a sense of what people came around and asked me what I was doing. And it just had a show. They've been in a lot of shows, but I'm really pleased because there was a Nasty Women show, and I gave them about 10 of them. And I said, listen, here, I'm giving you 10. You can post them any way you want. Here are some red pens. Tell people to write in the blank areas anything they want. When I go back to New Haven, I get to see what people wrote on it, which will really be interesting. This was done in 1973, and now it's 2018. I'd like to see what people wrote. Would be informing of something. I don't know what. And then we had a week of conferences at the Women's Building. There was one in women in film, women in dance, women in music, women in design. And this is the poster I did for women in design. And in order to have everybody have something which was like a takeaway, I went to a hardware store. I love hardware stores. Everything in hardware stores. So I found these eye bolts, and you got little keychains for under $2. You can still get all the makings of this necklace. So everybody who came to the conference got one of these necklaces. And what was interesting to me is that I think it's 2 years ago. This was just recent. This is actually Laura Combs, who just graduated a year ago, and she went to the Women's March, and she made the sign with a replica of the eye bolt. And there it is again, hanging with for one of the Nasty Women shows. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about this before I go on. This is a T-shirt I made during Tiananmen Square in order to get money for people, because I thought it was just so horrible what was happening to the people who were protesting. And I had in my studio, one of my assistants was Chinese, so I said, could you write it in Chinese? So she did, and it was printed, and we had them. Then decades have passed. It's a long time. It turned out that she had graduated from Otis, Vivian Wong. She is Hong Kong Chinese, which means that she used traditional characters. So now, if you see this, it looks, for people in China who know the difference between simplified characters and traditional characters, it looks like it's the Taiwanese and the Hong Kongese who should not obey the mainland Chinese. So the entire meaning of this shifted just simply because at that time I didn't really know the difference in the way in which Chinese is written in those different areas, but it's more appropriate now in a way. And so this is the thing I was going to say. These two women, Moa and Michaela Christensen, sent me an email, and they said, we would really like, could we have permission to use your eye bolt as an art piece, but to make it much larger? And I said, of course. First of all, I'm so amazed that anybody asked permission for anything. Of course you can do that. And also, like, I don't quite own eye bolts. But I caution you not to make the chain, because I think at another scale it would mean differently. So they just made the bolt itself, and it hangs in a museum. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's UMEA in Swedish. It's a museum northern Sweden, and it's called Hello Sheila. And they have a little thing on the wall that says that. And they watch a videotape of the first group of women who came to the Feminist Studio Workshop at the Women's Building. And then this is just a, whoops, this is just a, we sort of skidded by something. We did show the Women in American Architecture show that was at the Brooklyn Museum and at the Women's Building. And it was a good way to bring both men and women to the Women's Building because it showed women architects from all over the United States and elsewhere. And actually, this poster I just sent to Sylvia Lavin at UCLA because they're using it in a show. But she wasn't very clear what the show was about, and I just sent it to her. I said, show it and send it back. Take care of it. But this is what we did to fix up the Women's Building because this building had been the Standard Oil Company of California's headquarters, and someone had stripped it of all the marble inside. So it was used as a storage place for. There are blankets that are used for moving things from place to place, and this is where a whole pile of moving blankets was stored. And I went and made a deal to rent it, and we made some spaces, and we painted. I'm worried about time, so I better go a little bit faster. So anyway, this was the entrance thing. It's in Cabell, which is Koch did it, I forgot now, in the 1800s, this typeface. But we found the wood type, and so we used that wood type. So it became the typeface for the Women's Building. And that's Yolanda and Terry at the front desk. And thanks to one of the things that Nixon did right was he created CETA, which allowed you to different states to give money to help educate people with new ways of doing things. And this is Rita Wright, who became really an expert on the Vandercook Press at the Women's Building, thanks to her tuition was paid by CETA. And also, I would just go back to this because it's important. Whoops. Oh, screw it, I'm going the wrong way. Yeah, I wanted you to see that this thing of asking a question, it's one of the ways you get people to think is putting a question mark and not putting an exclamation point or a period. So I've been really interested in thinking about design as a language, as a very evocative language, and particularly those marks like ellipses, the 3 dots that make a place for someone's thoughts, and question marks which ask a question. It opens it up for other people to participate even in their own thinking. Whoops, I'll go back the wrong way. So, and then people printed stories that hadn't been told, like stories of incest. And then one of the projects I gave at that time, I figured out that diazo printing, which is usually blue, in Texas they made a red one. So I got all that paper. It's only 5 cents a square inch. That process isn't popular now. It was an ammonia process that architects use. And so I had students at the Women's Building pick a place anywhere in Los Angeles where they felt uncomfortable and do a poster about what kind of treatment would be better than what they felt when they were there. And so this is Jerry putting up a poster about having been a waitress and wanting respect when she was there. And then Helen Lee made these little signs that said woman using the Chinese character for woman to make the W, and the character alone is the one between the M and the N. She stuck them all over the city. And this reminded me of something that Andrew Sloat and Rebecca Ross did, because for the LGBT Pride Week, they had blanks, and people came and wrote in whatever they wanted to write. And it was a wide range of responses. Some of them made no sense. Some of them were really extremely touching and the first time people had said anything in public. And then I was asked to look at the plans for a new parking garage that was going to be built on the site where a woman named Biddy Mason had lived. And at that time I lived and still I'm friends with Betty Saar. So Betty Saar and I both did a project at the site. And my project was in order for people to be able to know her history and to blend her history with the history of the city. So that, because it's important that we think that a city is made of its citizens. It isn't just the place, it's a place of people. And you could see this first panel of Los Angeles mourns and honors Grandma Mason from a path from Spring Street Now it's a park. Someone just sent me a picture of it, and all those trees have grown. It's nice. And then all the she wins freedom in court. She walks to California. In the 19th century, in the 1800s, people walked across the country. That's how people migrated, by walking. So it's amazing that Biddy Mason did that with her daughter, but also everyone who wanted to move, who didn't have money, walked. Walking is a very important act. We can talk about that later. But also, I made this agave, because it's one of the indigenous plants of Los Angeles, because, in fact, the largest population of Los Angeles was not Latino, it was African American. Someone just sent me an email that she asked somebody at the site which was his favorite part of it, and he picked the first panel, which says that. Anyway, this is actually not too far away from there in Los Angeles, about the Japanese Americans who lived at this site, and then during the Second World War, people who wanted to really get rid of the Japanese Americans, or at least not have them have as much success as they had for growing flowers, went and told the people on the East Coast that they were actually involved in the war, and so as a result of that, all the people in that part of the city were put into detention camps. And at this particular time when I did this was not widely known. This is the kind of sort of trunk that people brought their things from Japan to the site, and sometimes when they were removed, they put their things back in those trunks and took them away. And there were quotes from 3 generations of people. Anyway, each doorway told some of who lived in that building in an effort to get people to understand what kinds of things were here, like restaurants and clubs, and also that this refers to the fact that he bought the property in his daughter's names, but the next part of it tells you that there was an Alien Act which said that they couldn't own property if you were firstborn. So it had to be that someone who was born in the United States could own their property. And this is the thing that the FBI raided for disloyalty. They never found any evidence. They just decided on their own. And then there were people who said that hey, I'm as American apple pie. What's this craziness? So you have apple pie. And then this is the executive order in 1942, which forced all of the first generation people and the original people, the Issei, the Nikkei, everyone, into camps throughout the West, and it names all the camps afterward. So it's a way of history from below. History from below is usually associated with the people who are usually left out of the history from above. And then I moved to the West Coast, and you can't quite see what's going on here, but this is what started the Watts riots. And I was in New Haven at the time, and actually was in Miami, because Mohawk Paper gave a scholarship to people who graduated from the program, and I went up to the room and looked at the news, and there it was, the Rodney King massacre, basically. And so I couldn't believe that the city I just left was so terrible, and I didn't even know anything about New Haven at that point myself. But I did know that there was a part of the city which was really depressed, and they were going to sort of upgrade it, otherwise known as gentrification. In this case, isn't what gentrification usually does, which is to make poor people leave and then upgrade it so that they couldn't possibly live at that part of the city. In this case, there wasn't anything going on in these buildings. They were sort of vacant, and it was a depressed part of the city. And you can see it was just just all graffitied. And so I did a project that had to do with who had contributed to the city of Los Angeles over 300 years. So it's a fairly arbitrary thing to do that, to pick just, I had $25,000. I made 24 of these medallions that are sort of like a compass rose. And I researched all of it. So Ezekiel Scott had a grocery store there. Joseph McAlpine did an amazing thing. And one of the workers said to me, why do you put a person who was a janitor in the store? I said, did you see what he did? He convinced the gas company not to turn off the gas when people couldn't pay, but rather to, help them make a program of how they would pay over time, and meanwhile they would still get gas. And he did it all himself. He was totally smart about it all. And then I grew up at the end of a subway line near Coney Island, so I know that the people at that station know that station really, really well because they spend a lot of time there. And I went to college from that station for 4 years. So I know my station very well. This station is the other end. It's at Inwood, which is the northern part of Manhattan. And I did this project. I was asked to, it was a big station. They were dividing it into 2 stations. So as a result, they were upgrading it. And I competed with 2 other people for this project, and I probably got it because I said, listen, I know this train. I know all the trains really well in New York. So it says, at the start, it's made out of broken glass, and they said it was going to look like a whorehouse. I said, what do you mean it's going to look like a whorehouse? It's going to sparkle. It's going to catch all the light from the fluorescence. And so I said, I can mix into the broken mirror. I can also mix some of the Italian tessera into it. How's that? So we got away with that, and it really does sparkle. And you can see it has the ellipses I was talking about, the 3 dots. After the 3 dots, there are 207 quotes from people in the neighborhood about some aspect of life in that neighborhood. Here's one of them. Hercilia is actually the wife of one of the people who chose me. And she's talking about St. Patrick's Day, which just recently passed. And whoops, I went back one. So actually, I was at Barnard giving a talk, and I didn't feel well. And so as a result of that, I said, anybody know Inwood? Because I was what they called a commuter. So I commuted up to Columbia from Coney Island. And so this woman sent me this email. And you can imagine, she actually said what I hoped someone would feel, that they would finish the sentence themselves, that they would connect to what the intention was to make a place for their thoughts. And she shared her thoughts. It was like a gift from heaven. It was really terrific. And then, whoops, why does it go 2? I probably hit it too hard. So actually, as you leave, it says at long last, and as you get into the station, it says at the start. ... Okay, so. And this is a project in Rhode Island. This is a project where the Rhode Island Department of Labor and Training was moving all its different offices from all over Rhode Island to one site that had been a home for people who didn't have a home. It was really, if you really find the old history, it's really pretty bad. And the people literally at the end of the year sold people who didn't have a job or were insubordinate to other towns as workers. I mean, I was reading about this history, and I called David Montgomery, who's a labor historian. I said, was it as really horrible as I think it is? And he said, yes, it was just as horrible as you think it is. So I couldn't figure out, what am I going to do there? I can't resolve problems like this. People are losing their jobs. People who are workers are being told they should learn to use a computer. So it seemed to me like an impossible thing to do. So I came up with this idea of making basically a lazy Susan table. And I figured out you could have 10,000 different ways of moving these different things. So let's say if workers, if managers, if visitors, or all the different types of people who came to the department for help would only adjust so that all the things that are sort of allows you the sentence to go on, and then walk out, organize, go shopping, all different kinds of things. So people can talk, and then people did it. They came in at lunchtime and moved the pieces of the table. whoops. Oh, there we go. So here is Yekaterinburg. That's Yekaterinburg. This, okay, good. This is the water tower. I was asked to go to, the person, Kendall Henry, who is an arts administrator, who's from Santa Lucia Island, who's a great arts administrator, got involved with this Russian group, I don't know how called, a CEC Arts Link. And they needed someone to go to this town and do a project in concrete. And he remembered that I'd done the Biddy Mason project, so he suggested it should be me. And I said, sure. So I went and they showed me two places, and I chose this place because you couldn't get into this water tower very easily because they were just sort of misshapen rocks that you had to climb across. So I said I could make a step there at the concrete factory for the people of the town. And there were a group of students who volunteered to work with me on it. And I don't know if I included a picture of being in the, no, I didn't. We worked in the concrete factory, and so anyway, here I was at night trying to figure out how, I was going to tell Kendall that I didn't have enough time to cut all the letters, because I was seeing it was taking me out of fiberglass, out of styrofoam. But I realized I don't want to wake him. It's like 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the morning. So I decided that, I'll just put the first letter of every word and then leave the space for the other letters. So it came out to be a much better project, because as a result, the students wrote in what they meant, which is who's to blame, and things are really difficult. But when the rain came, it washed away those words, and you can write any other words that start with those first letters. So it's the poets have adopted this project, and they're writing poetry to it. And so it turned out way better, and it was only because I was being too slow cutting out the letters. And then I had been going to Hong Kong because I love New Haven, I love teaching, I love everything about it, but there's certain times of the year where there's like nobody on the sidewalk, and sidewalks are meant for people. There's like hardly anybody on the streets. So if you go to Hong Kong 24/7, there are people on the streets everywhere. And I just love being there, just to be with other humanity on the streets of Hong Kong. I even learned how to count in Cantonese. So that's about it. But this school, I knew the people who were teaching at this school. It's in the New Territories, and they got this big va-va-va-voom building built in the New Territories. And when I came there, I had proposed the idea of using conjunctions, because I took a class in Mandarin, and I saw that you can't do what we do in English, put a conjunction at the beginning of a sentence. It has to be a connecting of one thought to another thought. So I thought that I could put little places, I would put little conjunctions, and people would imagine first parts to it. But when it turned out, when I got there, my God, this is a huge building. You can't have little things anywhere. So, they had asked me to come they liked the idea, but they didn't know what I would do if I hadn't been there, so go. So I went and I looked, and all the students, this building is really quite interesting in many ways, but there was like no place for the students to sit down and talk to each other. They were sitting on the floor in between rooms, because no one had thought about a kind of collective place other than going to the coffee shop on the main drag. So I went upstairs, and I saw on the left this empty room that hadn't been developed yet. And I went to the president, and I said, "What are you planning to do in that room?" He said, "I was thinking maybe designing food design." I said, "What are you thinking of, Sheila?" I said, "Well, I'm looking to make some place where the students can come with their devices and hang out with each other, like a nightclub without alcohol." And so he said, "All right." So I got these beanbag chairs. I had the concrete poured so that it was very shiny, and we put a shiny coat on it. And there were little tables to put food on if you wanted to. And then I put this LED band all the way across the entire thing, which had different different conjunctions. So all these green conjunctions would travel on this band, and you could even put, "Sheila came here to teach, and I hate her." But it would only go through like twice and then disappear, so that it could keep being added to. And And then one thing happened which was really terrific, something I hadn't predicted at all, which is that two guys came, one of whom is a musician and his friend, Philip, and they got up and then they did this.
This is an animation film. Oh,
So they made it look like it was, and they moved it. So serendipitous things that you hadn't predicted can happen anytime. So I thought you would enjoy that. And this is just to remind you all to find some unsung and sing their songs as a graphic designer. Thank you. So if you have a question, please ask it. I mean, I'll answer anything, or I'll try. Thank you for breaking the ice.
You're welcome. My question's related to your tenure in graphic design, and it's related to the tools that the designer used today. For example, Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator. Do you think that these tools have perhaps lost some of the unique design techniques that the traditional graphic designer has used in the past?
No, because I see, first of all, those are hardly, there's UX, there's
Right.
AI, there's, the tools have become much, much, much broader, and our students are using all of them. I see them pouring their hearts and their souls and their ideas into work every day. I don't see any problem around it. What is a problem is to spend all your life sitting in front of a computer. That's a problem. Get up, move, go somewhere else, see somebody else, talk to them, and figure out. Also, you can see need. It's not so hard to see it. Figure out what your own need and address it and use it in the work. Find out people who you care about. You don't have to find someone who you don't know. You can do it in any group that you want to work with, and also for yourself. My program is entirely selfish. People come for 2 years in order to learn to do work that they really care about doing, and that feels selfish at the moment, but it's usually redirected out from that. I mean, one of the guys right now, the last project I just saw, where he's doing. It's hard to explain the technical aspect of it, but he was trying to keep the hand motion of drawing, but in something which is like a GIF. But the way he did it is like, it almost implied that there was a ball, there was a globe that you were going around, but these marks were going around. And it was so tender, because you could feel the hand, you could feel the desire, and you could feel the absence. So I don't think it's dependent on tools. It's dependent on someone's heart, their desire, and whatever tools you can learn. Because the other thing that works in the program is that when people learn how to use After Effects or whatever will be the latest things that'll come for video, learn how to use the motion capture rooms, to learn how to use all these different techniques of making. They are viable as makers in the world. So if they want to sell their skills, they can get those jobs. I don't know what's going on here, but you can find them any place. But if you want to take those skills and do the things in it that really mean something to you, that's what the program does. So you have the things that you made that you really wanted to make, and they get better each time. And then you can also you can sell those skills to the people who need those skills. So one way or the other, you can actually support yourself and also contribute to society. Doesn't matter. It's better to have more than one skill. Definitely better. I mean,
Thank you.
Print will not be enough usually. So usually people have 2 or 3 or 4 or more, because that's what's needed. But actually, there's a lot of, I don't know about you guys, have you been thinking about how meaningless the word design thinking is and how many people use it? Yeah, so I don't use that word. I don't think there's a design thinker. I think there's someone who thinks and cares and wants to make things better. and is looking for what thing they can do that will do that. And it starts with yourself. If you don't do it for yourself, you're not going to do it for someone else very well.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could speak to your experience raising a child while pursuing your work.
Well, luckily I only had one. And he happened to be a good one. What can I say? He was very portable. He did. I never heard of au pair. I didn't have family. I just took Jason everywhere. First, like for the International Design Conference in Aspen, I asked them to give me daycare. So I was able to bring him to Nanny Noodles, which was someplace for children where they had goats and things like that. And so he had a very nice time in Aspen while I did that. So he's been a lot of places with me. And even when at CalArts, we campaigned for childcare at CalArts, and we got childcare. So I drove to CalArts with Jason and put him into the daycare and then picked him up on the way out. So if you don't have, it wasn't because I didn't have funds, it's more that I didn't even know there was such a thing. So I just took him. And he's great. He just wrote. I just wrote him a note. Hey, what's up? I haven't heard from you a bit. And he wrote back, I'll call you tomorrow. I said, no, I'm moving. I'm a moving target right now. So, yeah, I'm not saying it's easy. My office has been a pumping station. It's like for the women who have had children who are faculty of mine. I think it's doable. It's just harder because there's something once you have a child, that child is in your mind. Like one part of your brain is thinking about where that child is. Like in LA, I was always afraid there was going to be an earthquake. I was going to be somewhere far away and I wouldn't be able to find him, that kind of thing. But, and also I have a really good husband. So it's not, I don't have to ask him to share things. He shares. So, but I do think once I've seen two, and they always go this way. And it's hard as being one person chasing one student, one kid's going this way and one kid's going the other way. That's another problem. Because I lived with another family in these two houses, and they had two boys, and I could see right away it was going to be much, much too hard. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. And maybe you figure out another way to do it. But I know one is totally doable. I mean, not when they get sick. Yeah. He didn't get sick. That was also good.
So I loved the work you had on a lot of the feminist pieces that you had in the beginning. So what do you think of the Me Too movement and what's going on with women today? And what do you think will work?
Well, first of all, don't make the mistakes that have been made before. Reach out. Don't only be in your little subgroup. Join other groups. Even if you don't quite agree, talk about where you don't agree. I think it's great. I think more and more women are saying what's been happening, and I hope people aren't getting bored hearing it, because it's everyone of my generation has had those experiences. And I remember at Yale when my photography teacher grabbed me in the darkroom, and I actually asked one of the other women, because there were only two, I told her what happened. She said, oh, that happens every year. and the head of the department won't do anything about it. And what I feel badly is I didn't press, because I've had other experiences. Because when I was at Barnard, I needed money. I had a full scholarship, but I didn't have money to eat, so I went to the food, to the what do you call it? People who give you jobs. And they said, well, you're skinny and tall. Go model in the garment district. They had no idea how you're trashed as a woman in fashion. It's really, you really are just a glorified hanger, and people just don't treat you like a person. But when I won this Distinguished Alumna Award, and I met other women who were got to be law assistants. I said, "You got a real job." They're selling me down to the garment district without ever having gone there themselves, without ever even knowing what goes on there. So in many ways, I think this broadens the band of people who know this goes on. What they'll actually do about it, that's harder. I think some really good things are happening from it. So viva Wakanda! No, I really, everything is slow, and it really is one of those 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing. Things don't change anywhere as fast as you'd like them to change. So I can't get too helpful, but people can't be totally ignorant anymore. I mean, but there's evidence that they are every day in the newspaper. So I don't know what to say. You know, one would hope they couldn't be this stupid, but in fact, they want to be stupid. They like it. It gets them somewhere. Well, if you don't look and you don't want to allow your consciousness to see things, you can block a lot out. That's how you could. And I was just reading today in the library something from Carrie Mae Weems. Because it's a play that she wrote, and it's all filled with all the things that are going on. You know, even though her work, and I know her from LA, is really more evocative than it is specifically about the kind of atrocities that go on and the constant fear of being pulled over because if you even are getting the ID they ask for, they also think you're getting a gun. I mean. It's all filled with what is going on everywhere. And one of the things that's really very clear, the women's movement, the women's march, is not going to have much meaning if they don't also march with Black Lives Matter. You can't just march for yourself. You have to march with everybody. So, I mean, I don't promise anything because I don't know what can happen. This is a really crazy time. People are behaving atrociously. And ways that are, so at the same time that good things are happening, bad things are happening. Can you weigh it? Usually more bad than good. But you have to look at the good part and try to model how you live on it to some extent to make it work. I mean, one of the things that happened at Yale that was really instructive to me, our students did a billboard. They painted a billboard that 72% of Americans were pro-choice. And one of the guys in the program really felt badly because he was Catholic and he was not pro-choice. And I ended the class. The class was about community action. And I ended the class because I don't think it should be top down. It has to bubble up from below, from people who really feel it and know it. And I don't want that role of telling people this is what they have to do in life. So any more than I can tell it to you. So it's really, it has to be a choice. And people, every year there are people who do things in the community and do things with communities that they are a part of. It's having people do cross-community work is really, really harder. Because you're going to find where you don't agree, and you're going to have to deal with not agreeing and figure out what are the compromises that are viable and which ones are destructive. But it can't only be in your own community. It won't work, I don't think, if we want a really a well-knit society. Up and down.
Hi, Sheila. I just want to say it's really lovely to have the opportunity to speak to you. I've been fortunate and privileged to recently in November have the opportunity to go to CalArts to research the feminist art program materials. I'm an archivist and a designer and studied at Goldsmiths, so there feels like a full circle of actually having the opportunity to. We learnt a lot about Victor Papanek, but your voice and work didn't come through. And I'm just, in regards to the last question and what you're just saying, and just I've been thinking a lot about how you just, at that point, I know it's not the 70s anymore, but as somebody that ran a women's charity and we just took space and just thinking a lot about, I recognised that it was always about addressing need. It wasn't just about theory, and just wondering what your thoughts are, and particularly in a space like Minneapolis, for a kind of reenactment to rethink what a woman's place would look like today in a city like this.
First of all, I don't know your city, so it should be done by the people in the city itself. And I don't know there always are particular things to that place and also to that time. So it would have to be for now and for the future. And I think then we'd have to learn I think the same thing that I'm saying. We'd have to learn to be across groups more, so that I mean, my friend Yantara and I were talking, and she feels it's with her that I talked about this whole thing about positionality, because I don't tend to use a word like positionality. She said, use it, it's useful, because it's very much about your relationship to power. And power, that relationship to power has to do with context. So if we're ever going to change the narrative from being this sort of straightforward narrative to something that it really deals with the conflict that's there, it has to be across some way. So I think if you can figure out how to do, I tried at the Women's Building to make it across age groups, across color groups. It was not easy. I mean, that's why I mentioned CETA. If it hadn't been CETA, I wouldn't have been able to have Rita and other people of color come to the Women's Building, because they needed money to take the time to do it. And I learned a lot of things from them as well. So I think looking for what are the possibilities now that are allowed to cross over around age, around color, around ethnicity, a place of origin, perspective, so that find the subjects that you can maybe have those cross discussions with. That's the only, because I think that for me, that's when I try to think of what's hopeful, that's the most hopeful to do. But it has to be done from the heart, and it has to start with the people that you know, and maybe start from a smaller group and then build out, or figure out what subject more people could actually relate to here. I don't know I don't know here well enough. I mean, I was reading about how Native Americans were treated here. You know, it's a pretty horrible story. It's not unique to Minneapolis. Like, no story is unique to any one place. But there must be something that is here. Well, this did it. I mean, enough different people came to this. I don't know. I just don't know here well enough to know. I mean, the program at Yale attracts people from all over the world, but I would not say it's really ethnically. The number of people of African descent have mostly been from Africa, not from African American. They've been people their family are in Africa, and their parents came and they're here. So it's not, they haven't been brought up through the history of African American experience. That, I think in my years at Yale, there may have been only 2. That's very, very little. And it's very hard. It's a graduate program. That's a ready problem, because something has to have happened much earlier that even introduces what graphic design is. I mean, I actually thought I would make signs saying, what is graphic design, and stick them up on all the trees. At least they ask the question, maybe they look for the answer. You know, some way to get it to happen. Because I was lucky. I went to a high school which had somebody who taught graphic design. Who knew? And he actually did a lot of things. He found out all the prizes in all of New York City that had a money prize, so that we would win money for doing our graphic design. He was a very savvy guy, and so I had my parents weren't factory workers, and they weren't even from the United States, so they really didn't know the American system. So they would have never come up with this idea. It took someone in high school to do that, and I feel very fortunate because I was interested in it, but I wanted to get educated, so I went to Barnard. Doesn't have graphic design. So what I did is I lettered all the diplomas in high school, in college as well. 25 cents a diploma. It's not bad. 1,000 people graduate from my high school. Wasn't bad. So yeah. I don't know the answers. That's the best I can do. Yeah. Oh yeah, then you, because so you raised your hand too. Yeah, go ahead, go.
Well, clearly you have.
Wait, she has a microphone because no one can hear you.
So clearly you have a lot of feministic and female-forward pieces, and I'm just wondering, have you ever been afraid of showing your work publicly, maybe in fear of public backlash?
Well, I have it now because I'm going after I go to LA, I'm going to Beijing. I don't like to be in places of power. And Beijing is like the capital of all of China. Like, I wouldn't show that T-shirt there. I don't need, that's not important enough to do at this time. But I'm just not sure what I'm doing well, I am now sure what I'm doing because I had to plan it. But I felt the thing you're saying. I felt the discomfort. Because first of all, I don't want to be in trouble in China. I want to do something that's useful in China. I'm not going to solve the problem of the kind of hierarchical situation they have. But I also don't want to get caught in its snare. So what I did is I'm doing a talk about what's called prompts, because I use prompts in teaching. I have used it, I've taught in China. So I know that Chinese students, just like Hong Kong students, just like my students, if you give them just a little dirt for their oyster, they're going to make a pearl. It's possible. Just don't tell them how it's going to turn out. So I give them so I wanted to explain what prompts were, and also the same thing about language, because they have the same thing with, ellipses, question mark. How you can tease people, gaps, question marks. I figure that's a safer way to go toward egalitarian principles in a place that isn't exactly egalitarian. But I don't feel like, it's like when I march, I'm never in the front of the marching, because those people want to go to jail. I don't want to go to jail. I'm back here. I'll be one of the many. Thank you very much. I want to go to jail. I want to choose when I go to jail, if it's at all possible. So yeah. So I think. So I know the feeling of, all right, what in this community can I get away with, and what can't I? And I have that at Yale. I mean, I'm not interested in Yale University hierarchy. I'm interested in my students have access to all those brilliant minds and all the little goodies and all the different organizations that have all the technical stuff that they want, and bringing people from all over the world, each one who does. It's a little like the music school. You don't have the person who plays the piano teach the person who plays the violin. You have someone the best at the piano and the best at the violin, and that's what I have in graphic design. And that's what I want. That's why I have a gazillion faculty. Everybody just comes when they can, and they teach for 3 weeks or 1 week, whatever they can, so that my students can have all those different kinds of ways of thinking. And also that they actually see somebody who looks like them, and also someone who speaks their language, which I can't do. The amount of Chinese I know is really little. So yeah, I know the feeling of not wanting to get into trouble. I mean, every time I've gotten into trouble, it's because I didn't look, and I didn't think about it. So, but also, I was at a friend of mine who's Chinese wedding, and Reverend Corfin was at my table, and he asked who has been in jail as a prize, to raise your hand that you would to jail. I said, what's this thing about wanting to go to jail? It was like but I was young then. I was like 21 or 22 at that time, and I didn't get brought up to go to jail. That was my goal in life. But it was part because you took part in the front of the line of things. And I think I've not done that. I'll be the front of the line for women. That's a different situation here. You don't go to jail for being a woman only. They have to have some other things that they're going to pin on you for it. But I do know the fear, and I have friends who have that fear for different reasons. Like right now, I have so many people who are writing letters for their lawyer that they're the best in the. I wonder who is it out there going to see the same person's name at the bottom of all these letters, saying this is the greatest person in the face of the earth. You should definitely hire them and let them stay in the United States. It's really crazy. So yeah, I think fear everyone has. I'm someone who adapts really well. I figure out adaptive behavior, but the only thing that I've never figured out exactly is that the cost of the adaptive behavior, because there's a cost. I mean, when you are doing something that's not 100% the way you would do it without it hurting, I don't want to hurt. That would be a nice thing. I haven't totally figured that one out, how not to hurt at the same time as you tell people. Because I've had people say in print that I was going to ruin the program because I was going to bring the outside in. I said, we're in the outside. What outside is there? You just walk on the street, you're in the outside. You bring the outside with you when you come inside. So it's the idea of the ivory tower, I think, is one I never quite, got behind. And I do think I'm avoiding things. I avoid the upper echelon of things if I can possibly not have to deal with them. And actually, most of my projects are not in the center of the city. They're in the outskirts, toward the edge of the city, because you can get away with things there more easily. People aren't invested in a single point of view in those places. So in that way, that could be a kind of evasive behavior on my part. I want it to work, and I want it to work well. I mean, and then also, like I'm doing this project in Los Angeles. It's because there was. I'll tell you the story because it's interesting in a way what's happening. This was an arena, a smaller arena downtown in LA that was made for sports. So the Lakers played there. The main team played in this arena. Then they built fancy arenas, so they went away. And so the arena started to be used for what the neighborhood wanted. So when Selena was murdered, there was a requiem for her, a mass for her there. Care Harbor filled the arena with doctors and dentists for free dentistry and free doctoring for the neighborhood. Celia Cruz played. I actually went to Celia Cruz's concert there. My husband was frisked as we went in. I went with my friend Angela Pickett. And at any rate, it became something that really, Free Huey, Farrakhan, it dealt with everything that the people in that neighborhood needed. Now they tore it down in 2016, and they're building a va-va-va-voom, huge arena. And it's going to be for soccer. And they're going to teach soccer to anybody who wants to learn soccer. So they asked, because there was little pushback, they asked me if I would do something to honor the old arena. So I'm doing that. But it's interesting to me. That's what's good about that is it reminds people that these people were here and there. Queen Latifah was there. Lots of people were there. So at any rate, but what's going to happen, though, it was really apparent when I went about a year and a half ago, and the neighborhood's going to change. And then the people who this was for are not going to be able to live there. Now, maybe they'll come down to a soccer game, but that's different. And so, in a way, this whole thing of doing permanent projects in neighborhoods change, and they usually get gentrified, and then I can be looked at as someone who's part of that gentrification. I sure as hell don't want that. So it's very hard to keep yourself totally clean of all this stuff because it's coming after you without you really planning it. And so I'm not sure what to do about that. That's a complicated thing. And I'm doing something in New Haven. There's a underpass that you have to walk through to go to the train. It is like nobody cares about it. The DOT is in charge of it, and the city's supposed to take care of it. And it's like the worst. I mean, even the water from the highway comes and it makes it icy. And the people who live in South Street, which is a very poor housing project there, I talked to them, and they were saying that there are a lot of unwed mothers, and they don't want to wheel their children there because it's dangerous. So I made a proposal for how to fix it: widen the sidewalk, make lights that light up as you pass, and then another idea that had these 6 spotlights, so as you walked you could strike a pose or something under the sky. Anyway, it's actually going ahead, I think. I mean, they're paying people to do it with me and everything. But they're going to tear down South Street. They're going to tear down that, so because that's a really tasty piece of property. It's right across from the train station. So now, if by the time they finally get around to building the thing that I've done, first of all, maybe they'll start walking because walking is a healthy thing to do when your mind changes as your body moves. It's a very good idea. At any rate, but it could be a totally different neighborhood, absolutely different, not the same at all. So I really don't know how to get around that. I don't. I haven't found a solution to that. If you have one, tell me. I'll give you my email address. Because every place I've ever been or lived has been gentrified to a degree that it doesn't feel real. And I don't, like New York, I don't want to live there. I lived there when it was it was dangerous, but I figured out how to live there. And now it's no one can afford to live there. So I don't have, there are loads of answers I don't have, questions that I don't have answers to, that mostly have to do with the way in which things just don't seem to get better. They get better for some, but they don't get better for all. And the some seem to be too similar. So, and they don't seem, they are. So I'm not sure. I mean, that's like the kind of question you're asking. It's very hard. It's just hard to keep jumping ahead of the forces of homogenization, the forces of separation, the forces of inequality are very strong. And it's a full-time job all of its own. Design can only do so much. It's hard to do. There are some people who are doing some amazing things, but I'm not sure that any of it's going to solve it if enough other people don't do it, too. I do think joining with other people who feel similarly and then looking for another group that doesn't think exactly like you is a good idea. It seems like the best idea I can come up with. Do you still have a question? Yeah.
Yes, I have another impossible question for you.
And I'm going to have another inadequate answer.
Going back to your idea of communicating across communities and communities that are different, and you've had very practical experience doing this, I would like to know how in this polarized era that we're living in, how can I communicate and have some sort of meaningful communication with someone who doesn't believe in verifiable facts? And I'm not saying this politically.
I know.
I'm saying this from a human point of view. Mm-hmm. I don't know, and I don't know if it's a design question or more of a personal question. I know it's impossible.
I don't know. I know this is not the right answer, but it's the first thing. There must be some strange kind of like ironic way to be sneaky about it, to make fun of how. To make something happen and then tell about it is something which is make it so unreal in the telling that people would see the difference between the thing that they just experienced and the telling of it. To try to make something like that vivid, you'd have to be extreme in it. I'm not sure even what thing I could imagine, but if something happened here, like I don't know. I know someone lit a fire on one of the chairs, and it could endanger everyone. And someone else said, "Oh, that's just ice. That's not fire. That's ice. It's nothing. It won't do anything." It's something that's the opposite of what it is. It's a terrible example, but I can't think of anything else. Something where the thing that it is so apparent, and the telling of it is so incredibly wrong. Maybe you start with something like that, which is not, attached to any one belief system, but something physical, as an exemplifying, as an example of what's going on, of telling things in the opposite of what they are, or very different from it, as if they were the truth. Now, best I can do on a short string, I don't know. Sure.
Hi there. I have a typography question.
Ah, thank God.
So
something easy.
From what you've shown, you have a lot of
sorry.
experience working with typography over different cultures and different languages. What are some of the greatest challenges with working with like Russian or Mandarin that you've been able to overcome?
Are you talking about typography, or are you talking about the marks that are the way letters are formed? Well, it's pretty much the same thing. Well, yeah. I'm not sure I'm answering your question right. I mean, there's some things I've learned about typography from different cultures, is that it took me a long time to figure this one out. Had to do with like Arabic, which has a kind of flow and then marks that have the tonal things, or Chinese where it's written in a box, whether it's a single line or it's a very complex character. Art don't have a figure ground situation the way that Latin letters and letters that have closure do, where there's a central in the counter space and mark. And so people from those cultures, I don't think differently about figure ground as a result of it. That's one thing that's become apparent over time. And so I actually have a class that is a pre-class before, because I have Matthew Carter, Nina Stossinger, and Tobias Fair-Jones teaching typography. They're teaching letterform design. But there has to be a class before that that somehow makes the whole relationship of form and counterform understood and useful to someone, so that when they come to do it in whatever letter form they're trying to do, they see that. You know what I mean? Is that something near what you're asking?
Yeah, I think so, because I have no idea. I've never worked with other languages like that, so I'm just curious, like what insight you have.
My interest in language, there were 5 languages spoken in my household, none of which I know, because everyone was learning English, and so was I. I was a kid, so I didn't learn that much. But I have an interest. I can hear English almost inside of almost anybody's mangling of it, which is not true of a lot of my faculties who don't want me to accept people that they can't understand, because I usually can hear the English. I mean, sometimes for certain languages, the R's and L's are just so hard that. And I have an Icelandic student, and she told me the way you say Bjork is nothing like the way I'm saying Bjork. And I had her sit and say it twice, or I don't know how many times. I mean, I still can't make the sounds that she's making that comes out sort of Bjorkish in the way it is in Iceland. So I think different languages are really hard. I'm more interested in the sonar part myself. The written thought is just something I realized over time about figure field, which is something you are taught in early, like beginning graphic design. So people, that isn't what's being taught, and that's not how beginning people are taught. By the way, I should tell you, because I just read it. There's, I think, a really stunning article by, Sheila. It's called River of Consciousness, and the book is called River of Consciousness. It's by the guy who wrote The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. Oliver Sacks. Well, he has an article called on creative. No, the creative self. It is so smart about teaching. It's really. I mean, I should have written something to myself to have, but he makes some incredible points about creativity, which is worth sharing. I know it's not your question, but in terms of the way in which, he's not saying of that. I think about it in terms of undergraduate versus graduate. Undergraduate education needs a level of structure as well as freedom, because otherwise you need to have knowledge and skills and structure in addition to freedom. When you get to the graduate level, if you don't have freedom, you don't change, you don't grow. You need some encouragement for that really open-endedness in order to find the visual form language you really want to develop. And but he's saying that without saying anything about education, but he has another thing in there. He used Susan Sontag and somebody else, writer, to be the exemplars of the notion of really needing time some time to let it sink in. It takes a while. It's not like it happens. You can actually get someone to do a bunch of squares and figure out the figure field thing pretty quickly. Actual creativity takes time. And so you need some time, that's why I think spring break is a good time. You need time off. You need time for whatever it's been happening to settle in before the really coalescing of your thinking to happen and your making to happen. But he says it much better than I am, and it's a really good article. It's not that long. Someone I think who reviewed it took a quote from that particular chapter, and I went, wow, book, gotta get that book. But he's someone who's interested in all the aberrant behavior. I mean, who is going to be looking at why does the man mistake his wife for a hat? You know, he's interested in the way the brain works, and he's a doctor after all, and he's interested in things that are anomalous, and that gives him and actually, that's a very good thing to be interested in, because then you can accept the differences between people who seem the same. So looking for that anomaly within each person is really an interesting thing to do. Anyway, it just happened to pop in my head, so I shared it. That's it. Thank you.